Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us today with Sutta Study with Ayya Soma. So welcome to Poonam, Geeta, Edward, Eleanor, Jens, Robin, and Michael. Thanks for joining us. And if you'd like to follow along with the digital version of the sutta, feel free to click the link in the live chat. And if you have questions at any time, you can also type those in, and Ayya Soma will address them at the end of her talk. So I'll pass things over to Ayya Soma.
All right, thank you, Bante, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namassami. So this morning, we're going to go back to the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. So together with our volunteer, Adriana, we decided to go through the entire Bhikkhuni Samyutta, so that makes it easier. What the next sutta studies will be when I will be around. So we kind of rewinded all the way to the first sutta, the Āḻavikā sutta. So as I like to do, we can start by reading the sutta together in one breath and then contemplate it a little bit and get back to it later. So the sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's grove, Anantapindika's park. Then in the morning, the Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā dressed and, taking bowl and robe, entered the Savatthi for alms. When she had walked for alms in Savatthi and had returned from her alms round, after her meal she went to the blind man's grove, seeking seclusion. Then Māra, the evil one, desiring to arouse fear, trepidation, and terror in the Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā, desiring to make her fall away from seclusion, approached her and addressed her in verse. There is no escape in the world. So what will you do with seclusion? Enjoy the delights of sensual pleasure. Don't be remorseful later. Then it occurred to the Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā, now who is it that recited the verse? A human being or a non-human being? Then it occurred to her, this is Māra, the evil one, who has recited the verse desiring to arouse fear, trepidation, and terror in me, desiring to make me fall away from seclusion. Then the Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā, having understood this is Māra, the evil one, replied to him in verses. There is an escape in the world, which I have closely touched with wisdom. O evil one, kinsman of the negligent, you do not know that state. Sensual pleasures are like swords and stakes, the aggregates like their chopping block. What you call sensual delight has become for me non-delight. Then Māra, the evil one, realizing the Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā knows me, sad and disappointed, disappeared right there. So we can contemplate for a few moments. Lots of Dhammasukha. I love the Bhikkhuni Samyutta. This is, of course, one of my favorite suttas, as we like to say here at Empty Cloud Monastery, pretty much every sutta. So we see Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā, the sutta starts with a sort of regular day in the life of a monastic, at least at the time of the Buddha, and actually these days in pretty much still like Southeast Asia, where the monks every morning dress and go on alms round. In the West, it's slightly more complicated. There are some monasteries that I'm aware of where the monastics go on alms rounds every day. Here in New Jersey, we go on alms rounds once a week, so that's more what is standard. But anyway, we see how Bhikkhuni Āḷavikā dresses, goes for alms round, and then as she returns from alms rounds, she goes into seclusion to do her meditation practice in the blind man's grove, which I won't talk about since we've spoken about during the Soma Sutta and the Chala Sutta already. So we see how in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta there's always the same pattern, pretty much, where the bhikkhunis at a certain point go into seclusion, and then Māra, the evil one, goes and tempts them. No different than Māra has done to the Buddha and all the different arhats, as well as ordinary beings. And as usual, it's very important to think of Māra in different ways. We can think of Māra both as an actual being, a sort of Buddhist correspondent of Lucifer, perhaps, the tempter, but also as manifestations of our mind, also as the hindrances. And perhaps that this way of thinking about Māra doesn't necessarily have to be separate, but rather we can see how it can coexist quite naturally, or at least that's how I approach it. So we see how Māra appears in Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā's meditation by sort of dropping in and talking about how there is no escape in the world, and what is even the point to enter seclusion in the first place. If anything, actually one should be delighting right now, right here, right now, of all the great things that the chords of sensual pleasure can afford us, can give us. It's kind of amusing because my mom is often my Māra. Since I ordained, actually even before I ordained, but definitely she started getting a little bit more excited about these statements. When I put robes on, she was like, "Oh, you're still young. Come on, you still have a few years. What are you doing? Don't be remorseful later. Don't throw it all away. You can still do all these like great things. Enjoy your time. Come back to Italy. What are you doing? What is all this renunciation about?" And so what does it mean, escaping the world, first and foremost? I think it's very important to highlight that, or to ponder a little bit what Māra is talking about here. And how I see it, it's a little bit coming from that experience of YOLO, of you only live once. There is no escape from this state of existence. How can we escape even having a human body or the central realm? This is all we know. So it's not that necessarily Māra is telling Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā, or my mom is telling something to me that is so out of this world, so to speak, but rather quite the opposite. It's highlighting our instinctive experience of limitation. And one of the ways through which the Buddha actually talks about Nibbana is also in terms of, or the goal of the path in any way. It's also about escaping the world, but not in a way that means we don't like this and we are running away, but rather as an escape from suffering, aging, and death, which is the characteristics that pervade our experience, our human experience. So transcending, not necessarily having to go in a particular sort of realm of existence, but rather transcending any realm of existence to begin with. So the goal of Buddhist practice is not to escape this world and go to another world. Normally we like to think about paradise, or we like to think about more pleasant realms of existence than the human body. Well, the Buddha says those realms also exist, and they're definitely more pleasant than the human realm, but it's still marked by the same characteristics. So it's more the characteristics that we're trying to transcend in our practice. And we are trying to transcend suffering, aging, and death to begin with. And we see also how Māra talks about don't be remorseful later, which is another sort of phrase that can kind of very much appear as soon as we put robes on as monastics, or actually right before we put robes on as monastics, if we're not that old. The kind of like normal questions that arise in the mind are like, oh, am I wasting my life? Am I actually throwing everything away? Will I actually regret this? Bhante Sumano is smiling because he just recently ordained. So there's all this drama happening in the mind because we're so used to, that is the only sort of thing that we know. What society tells us, what family tells us, what pretty much anyone tells us. And we decide, once we ordain, to pretty much throw it all away and go, thanks, but no thanks. So, as we say in Italian, who leaves the old street for the new one knows what they've lost, but they don't know what they're going to find. It's not bad of a translation.
No,
right?
it's pretty good.
Normally my translations are really awful. But yeah, so I quite like actually that saying in Italian because it really highlights that sort of anxiety that we have a lot of times to make choices that are a little bit different than what we're used to. And that create that sort of space for thinking that we're losing something. And the point of Buddhist practice is, in fact, actually getting rid of a lot of stuff. And it is, in fact, making space by throwing a lot of stuff, both physically and mentally. But we are replacing it with actually a lot of like wholesome acquisitions of peace, of happiness, of kindness, wholesome mind states. Blissful is samadhi. There's nothing more delicious, more divine. Anyway, we see that going through the sutta, that then Bhikkhuni Āḷavikā, just like all the other bhikkhunis in the suttas, who are all Bhikkhuni arhats, so fully enlightened, they hear these verses and they're like, what is this? And immediately they understand it's Māra. Immediately they see right through. They don't fall for the trappings of Māra, so to speak, but rather they understand. They already have an clear understanding of reality. So just like everyone else, other arahats, enlightened being, Āḷavikā understands straight away that is Māra coming to arouse fear, trepidation, and terror in me, desiring to make me fall away from seclusion. This is very relatable. We can see whenever we sit down in meditation. So it doesn't have to be necessarily that abstract, even if we are staunch scientific materialists. As soon as we sit down in meditation, we can see actually, quote unquote, the temptations of Māra arising in our mind. Whether we're craving breakfast, if we haven't had breakfast and we're meditating before breakfast, or we're thinking, oh, what is happening? Well, there will be toast, that's more interesting. Or there'll be that oatmeal that I don't quite like. Or perhaps that quinoa, even worse. I really hope toast with jam is going to appear, and I hope it's not the whole wheat, but actually the white bread that's more tasty. So, right, sensual pleasures appearing. Or we're dead tired, and sleepiness is a lot more interesting and delicious than actually paying attention to our object of meditation, whether it's something so subtle as the breath, or whether it's something more intense as the pain. We're kind of like, oh, I just wished I could still be in my bed. Or maybe we wake up and actually we woke up before the alarm clock because our neighbor was particularly loud. So then in meditation, we're like, oh, I hate the neighbors. Oh, I hate their children. Oh, I don't have to make all this noise. Oh. Right? It will. And so forth. So then going through all the hindrances. So all the hindrances are Māra snares. So that's how Māra goes and tempt us and tries to stray us from concentration. But once again, it's also something that we do and something that we engage in immediately. So contrarily to Āḻavikā, who just goes like, oh, Māra, I see you. We're more like, oh, cute. Oh, Māra, what do you have? Oh, great. Do you have something else in your bag over there? Can you show me the whole repertoire? So we, invite Māra for tea fundamentally. And we do lots and lots of rounds. So we want to be a little bit more like Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā, perhaps, and understanding, oh, Māra, I see you. Māra, I understand. That's what you're trying to do. And recollecting. So I think all of this in the Bhikkhuni Samhita, what I really appreciate is actually an example of sati that is not sort of mindfulness, that is not necessarily just what we sort of normally think of mindfulness to be, which is sitting and paying attention and reflecting what we're doing. But in this case, applying that practice also with our thoughts. So recollecting the Dhamma fundamentally is what Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā is doing here. And she says, yes, actually there is an escape in the world, and I've seen it, Māra. I'm seeing it now. I've touched it with wisdom. And of course, the escape in the world is the path. And the final destination, that is Nibbana, which we access it through the Dhamma, through the cultivation of wisdom. And obviously, it's in opposition to anything that Māra stands for, which is why Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā says, you do not know that state. We can't even have a conversation. There's nothing to talk about. Just completely ignorant of it. You ignore it. And what I really like about what she says here, it's once again the sort of concept of the Buddha, of the concept, what the Buddha says over and over again. So understanding the gratification, the danger, and the escape. And fundamentally, understanding the gratification, the danger, and the escape in all of our experience is a practice of wisdom. So not pretending that, for example, a toast is not a pleasant experience. That is not, that there's no gratification, so to speak, in having toast rather than oatmeal in the morning. Not oh yeah, if I eat grass or I eat toast, it's the same. I'm so beyond all of these worldly pleasures, but rather understanding our experience and going, oh yeah, actually there is gratification in having toast with jam rather than grass. Or apparently this morning, the black rice, steamed black rice wasn't very successful. I think I was the only one who took it. Oh, 2 people out of them. So we had 20%, 30% success rate. Great. But yeah, we have to be realistic, right? And in looking at our experience and going, okay, well, there is gratification in sensual pleasure. If there weren't we wouldn't be so obsessed with it, right? So the Buddha encourages us to be quite frank with our experience and going, yeah, actually, it's quite nice to go on to be in the Amalfi Coast in Italy during the summer and having whatever meal by the beach. It's quite nice. It's quite lovely. You see the panorama. There's some gratification. But once we have acknowledged the gratification, we also have to acknowledge the danger, which is what we tend to overlook. And so understanding that it's impermanent. So summer in the Amalfi Coast, well, there are 4 seasons in the Amalfi Coast, so it's like 25% of the time that you can have that experience to begin with. On top of that, recently I also read that the mountain was starting to get destroyed, so crumbling. So there you go. There goes your nice little sort of favorite beach spot. It's subject to impermanence, just like everything else, subject to decay and death, fundamentally, even in the natural world. And it's ultimately unsatisfying. In my life, actually, every summer of my life, my mom is from there, I went there. And it was horrible. It was only great when I wasn't capable of going there anymore. Then that's the only thing I wanted to do. Now, the only thing I want to do is always be in Italy. When I was in Italy, the only thing I wanted to do was to escape Italy. So clearly, it's not inherently satisfying. Living in one of the most beautiful places in the world, like Rome, my entire adolescence, when I think of my adolescence, it was like the most atrocious time in my life. So clearly, being in one of the most beautiful places on earth wasn't a reliable source of happiness. So seeing the danger. Also the toast this morning. I didn't have it, but I had it last week. I only have toast once a week or so. It was good, but was it that great? It finished. Or Neapolitan pizza. I haven't had it now in a while. How many times, you have to go through the same experience over and over again to really look and see at the drawbacks of our experience. And then once again, we get to the escape, the delicious part. So what fundamentally the Buddha is offering us, which is basically the recipe for happiness. So we tend to think that happiness, our way of going about the world, is to seek different sensual pleasure. So for example, I didn't like Italy, living in Italy, so then I went to the UK. Well, it was worse than Italy. So then I went to New York. It was all right. But, constantly looking for the same recipe, but it's like basically looking for the perfect recipe for bread, but fundamentally you're always getting with the result is always bread. We just think that all of a sudden by altering slightly the ingredients we're gonna get ice cream, but we're actually just repeating a similar pattern. And the Buddha instead gives us another way of going about things, which is the relinquishment of the desire, letting go of our obsession for sensual pleasure, renouncing what we like to call here as JOMO, the joy of missing out, instead of FOMO, the fear of missing out. I don't know how people we are constantly in this FOMO state, fear of missing out. Then you don't miss out on anything and you're still fearful because it's just really not a good recipe, is it? But JOMO, you're just oh yeah, I'm gonna miss out on everything. That's great. Which is why here we're totally having no problem with the pandemic, because we're already had renounced everything, renounced going outside, renounced going to bars and to, I don't know, nightclubs, and I don't even know what people do. Concerts. Yes, I remember I used to go there. They all sucked, but I kept on going. Incredible. Now when I think about my life, all the choices I made as a lay person, it's incredible. Looking for the greatest concert. No, it's never satisfying. So yeah, so once you renounce everything, then you're perfectly fine. You're oh, okay, well, I'm missing out again. Great. Missing out again. Great. You're always winning because you're always losing. I think there was a saying in Thailand that they were sharing in February, that they were suggesting something like that. Intentionally go for the losing, so you're always winning. It's just very great way to go about in the world. And then we see how Bhikkhu Āḷavikā goes and ends actually with her statement saying, sensual pleasures are like swords and stakes, the aggregates like the chopping block. What we call sensual delight has become for me non-delight. Wow. Those are pretty intense words, aren't they? They're shocking. Sensual pleasures are like swords and stakes. Really? The toast with jam was like a sword and a stake? It's pretty pleasant to me, isn't it? And that's why Bhikkhu Āḷavikā talks about the aggregates being their chopping block. So what do you do with the chopping block? So fundamentally, it's breaking down our experience, breaking down our delusion in just some sort of few words to the point. So our misconception, I think that actually the most sort of perhaps relatable metaphor is when at least in this culture, there are certain things that are certain addictions that are considered taboo, like addictions to alcohol, addictions to all sort of intoxicants, drugs, etc. So we like to sort of stigmatize those addictions, but the Buddhist perspective is actually that we're addicted to everything. Myself, actually, I've been talking this morning a lot about food. I was totally addicted to food. I had no idea because it was not a particular stigma in this society. But definitely the relationship was exactly the same as any of my friends who had intoxicant addictions. No different. It's just that one is stigmatized and the other is not stigmatized. But fundamentally, this sort of delusion that comes in the mind of thinking that this is going to make us happy. And so we keep on consuming it over and over again. But we're also aware of the drawbacks. We're also aware of how it's fundamentally hurting us, not making us happy, yet we're addicted. And we can't stop ourselves. And that's how it's swords and stakes, at least this is my interpretation of it. Because we can't see it thoroughly. We can't understand. We're so focused on only one part of the glitter that we don't see the experience in its fullness. And it's so difficult to transcend it to begin with. And so the Buddha tells us that the stream enterer, so like one who is attains the sort of stage of the path that is irreversible. I really hope it's going to happen for me. Fully understands the 5 aggregates. And fully understands it in the way of the origin, the passing away, the gratification, the danger, and the escape. And the arahat, so the conclusion of the path, is when one is completely liberated by the aggregates, which is the case of Āḷavikā, of course, being an enlightened arahat. But we see how she talks about it in terms of like how it's our experience, how our process of sense of self is rooted in the aggregates. It's rooted in we're fundamentally creating the grounds for our suffering. But as she has understood fully this process, she talks about how sensual delight for her has become non-delight. So fundamentally, dispassion, fundamentally not being lured by the glitter in things, not thinking that whatever we're going to pursue is going to make us happy, but rather seeing the escape and pursuing the escape and having dropped all clinging and craving for the world. And so with this recollection, it takes us like a nanosecond for Bhikkhuni Āḷavikā to dispel Māra, who of course, disappointed. It's like, okay, there's no grounds for me where to sort of stick. So I'll go and harass the next Bhikkhuni. So the Bhikkhuni number 2 is Bhikkhuni Soma, where I get my name from, and that we've discussed already in the past. All right, so I think that's all I have to say this morning, or that kind of comes to me this morning. Maybe if you have any notes, questions, comments, feel free to type them in the live chat. And if not, we'll just have an early morning.
Thank you, Ayya Soma. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we just have so far one question from Michael, who says, did I understand correctly that we might take Māra as a literal personage or a symbol of our temptations, both? By extension, how about the realms? I guess realms of existence.
Both, at least that's how I take it. I think it's very helpful and useful. One, to actually really look at our experience. How do we look at the world? So I'm a scientific materialist. That's my cultural conditioning. So normally I'm not particularly keen towards other realms of existence or other sort of anything that sounds magical or transcendental. Which is why actually I put a lot of emphasis in thinking about Māra as a being, as an actual being, to counteract my tendency to be focused too much on the sort of physical world. And I feel on the flip side, if someone is too much veering on the can't find the right term. Can you help me?
Metaphysical.
Metaphysical. Thank you very much. Pontus doesn't always has the right word. On the metaphysical sort of edge, then it's good to keep it real and look how am I manifesting Māra? How am I impersonating Māra? So really looking at our mind and picking the right medicine to counteract whatever is happening there, or to provide the right balance. So then we have a full understanding of what we're trying to do. That's what comes to mind.
Thank you. And Gita Jnana says, it is a different kind of peace and bliss, that of being submerged in the Dhamma. It's beyond words.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the piece also of, once again, one doesn't have to wait till arhatship or not even till stream entry to really understand what Bhikkhuni Āḻavikā is talking about or to find dispassion. So we have this idea, it's true that there are certain concepts like instant enlightenment, especially in the Zen tradition, they put a lot of emphasis in that. But my experience is very gradual realizations. So that all of this, when I first encountered read this sutta, I probably was like, I don't know, swords and stakes. Well, I bet if you think so. It's like a cute poetry from 2,500 years, perhaps, right? Or like, oh, what you call sensual delight has become for me non-delight. I probably thought, oh, what a cute rhyme. But now, actually, that's the power of practicing the Buddhist teachings, that it becomes something experiential. So it's not that I have non-delight on everything, but definitely I am experiencing non-delight in a lot of things, or in some things, perhaps. But whatever it is, whether it's some, a lot, or entirely, we have the ability to see for ourselves the truth of these teachings and the instant happiness that comes from practicing this way. So it's not something that we can only experience at the end of the path. It's not something that, oh, then I become enlightened and, oh, finally I have this passion. But no, we're cultivating this passion. We are a growing plant fundamentally. It's not that from the seed then, boom, magically an orchard appears. You see all the different stages. And so when you grow something, you see it externally. When you grow it inside yourself, you see it inside yourself.
Thank you. And Sarah says, how to cultivate healthy dispassion. I enjoyed seclusion pre-Buddhism because I had aversion, I think. But now it feels different and I want more connection.
So it's very important not to confuse dispassion with indifference. So indifference is just another shade of aversion. And being an aversive type who, well, now actually I like a lot of people, but at the very beginning of my practice, the reason why I never experienced much loneliness in my adult life was because fundamentally I didn't like a lot of people. So for me, it was much easier to be alone than to actually spend time in groups of people and having to tolerate other people. So that's not dispassion. That's just cultivating unwholesome mind states. In fact, I was depressed most of the time, actually. Well, not most of the time, but often enough. Because that's what creating, like nurturing those unwholesome mind states, aside from the people around you that probably won't like you that much because you're like all the time, so they won't really gravitate towards you, so you succeed in the isolation part of it. But just being with a mind that is cultivating aversion creates the result of unhappiness. It's as simple as that. So that's not dispassion. Dispassion means basically non-obsession, non-infatuation. So it's very, what we can see is actually, how we can understand it is by looking at how our mind works when it comes to attachment. So especially if we've had romantic partners in the past. So we were actually talking about it yesterday of how it's interesting, when one meets a person. So in the past, when we've met people, perhaps, and we had a bit of information on them, and we created a whole narrative on them, right? Based on 4 facts. Perhaps the person is like 25, into the arts, from Sweden, I don't know. I would create a whole oh yes, actually they've had this incredible life. We would have all these things in common. I like Klimt, so I'm sure they like Klimt. We can go to Klimt exhibitions for the rest of our life together, blah, blah, blah. And we create all these ideas. Then we have a conversation with them, very sporadic conversation, which then fuels, we pick whatever we want from the conversation and we add it to the narrative. And we keep on having this obsession, and perhaps we get into a relationship with that person. Perhaps we even marry that person. And then after a couple of years, we're like, oh, actually, this person is a jerk. They never open the door for me. They never do anything for me. And then we're like, when I see it outside, I'm like, that person never opened the door for you. That person never didn't even like Klimt. Like, you're just like, it's not a new thing. It's just that fundamentally we stopped obsessing, we stopped infatuating, we stopped highlighting all the things that we like, we stopped creating a narrative. All of that has disintegrated, and we're left with a reality that is very different from the reality that we thought we were experiencing, because it was not real to begin with. So I see that in a lot of the relationships that people from my previous life within this life have. Like, whenever they complain about relationships, their relationship, I'm like, what are you complaining about? This has been the same since day one. But it's so much easier to look at it in other people than it is to see it in ourselves, to see it as it's happening, because we're obsessed, because we fuel it, because we are so enwrapped, we're attached. to whatever it is attached. Like the idea, like the word attachment, I love the word attachment because it really gives that uncomfortable feeling. Nobody likes anything attached to their skin, for example, or an ice cube attached to our tongue. Like, then you have to strip it out. Or the how do you call it? The Band-Aid. When it stays attached to your skin and you have to strip it out. Oh, so painful. It's uncomfortable while it's attached, and it's uncomfortable to strip it away. So that's what we are trying to do to cultivate this passion. So cultivate a mind that does not attach to anything, which does not mean indifferent. It means understanding the gratification, the danger, and the escape. Clearly seeing it, acknowledging it, going, okay, yeah, actually there is this person has great things. For example, if we want to keep talking about the same sort of example. Yeah, Sweden is a great place, but also has actually some drawbacks like any other country. So you see the danger, right? Like we can have a sort of whole picture. And if we're in a relationship with someone who has good qualities, we can acknowledge those good qualities and also acknowledge the parts where they're lacking. And also do the same with ourselves and try to grow and nourish the wholesome and dispel the unwholesome, rather than pretending that the unwholesome doesn't exist at all and creating wholesome stuff that doesn't even exist. So that's when we're cultivating this passion, because we're like, okay, yeah, it's fine. So it doesn't mean that one needs to be alone. Or better, it doesn't mean that one needs to be alone, but not lonely. But you can be alone and also with people in terms of, like, it's not that us monastics here are isolated. We all actually are in our face most of the time. Here at the monastery. So we're not hermits. We're actually cenobites. I think that's the correct term. I'm recently researching it. We live in communion. We live together. But we're cultivating all of these qualities, these wholesome qualities together. So yeah, don't be a hermit, especially as a lay person. I think that's completely bizarre. You're just going to hate your life at a certain point. But cultivate wholesome relationships. Cultivate spiritual friendships. Surround yourself with people who are committed to the path, so that they will support your practice and you can support their practice. And you can all move together towards happiness, towards freedom, towards liberation. That's great. Lovely.
Thank you, Ayya. And I think Bante Sumita was also joining in.
Ooh.
Dhamma USA, I
Wow.
believe.
Hello, Bante.
Thanks for joining, Bante.
I'm happy that I only know about it now. Otherwise, my heart would have had exploded.
And then just a couple of thank yous from people. Yen says, Empty Cloud should start making t-shirts and bumper stickers. Jomo.
Yeah, actually, I have an idea.
And Melinda also says hi, as well as Poonam and Ishan. So I think that was the final question. So thanks everyone for joining us today, or at least in the morning. You can join us this evening with Bante Jayasara, who will be sharing a Suba meditation with us. If you've never experienced that, it's very helpful. So
for
join us.
Dispassion, especially, very great.
Yeah. So join us tonight if you can, and then tomorrow morning for Sutta study again, and then monk chat in the evening. So always good to see everyone, and we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And enjoy the rest of your day or evening.